Welcome to the podcast series of Crispy Info. In this podcast, we will listen about the World Trade Organization, its precarious position that is unable to fulfill its promise of a comprehensive dispute settlement mechanism. We will also critically examine the origins of the World Trade Organization's decline, the geopolitical factors influencing its dysfunction, and the implications for global trade. The topic of the podcast is GATT-IFICATION of the World Trade Organization. So let's start the podcast. The World Trade Organization, WTO, headquartered in Geneva, was established in 1995 as a monumental step towards a rule-based international trading system. However, it now finds itself in a precarious position, unable to fulfill its promise of a comprehensive dispute settlement mechanism, and the paralysis of its appellate body is emblematic of deeper systematic issues that threaten the WTO's relevance in global trade. Now it becomes imperative to critically examine the origins of the WTO decline, the geopolitical factors influencing its dysfunction, and the implications for global trade. The origins of the WTO's decline. So we will trace the origin of the World Trade Organization's decline. The obstruction began during the Barack Obama's administration, escalated under Donald Trump's first presidency, and has continued under President Joe Biden. It reflects a bipartisan political consensus in the US. The US hostile stance towards the appellate body will intensify further under what is anticipated to be a highly protectionist Trump 2.0 administration. The WTO panels, the first stage of dispute settlement, continue to operate and render decisions resolving trade disputes between WTO member countries. However, this is of little significance because the losing country uses its legal prerogative to appeal to a non operational appellate body and thus stall the adjudicatory process. It is a fool's errand to put the appellate body back on track because the real issue is the WTO's existential crisis and its quest to be a relevant player in global trade. The larger game is not talking about killing the appellate body, but rather making the WTO dysfunctional. Now we will talk about and do an analysis of the promising beginning of the WTO. So, the evolution from GATT to WTO. The establishment of the WTO in 1995 marked a historic transition from the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade (GATT). It sought to address the limitations of its predecessor by shifting from voluntary compliance to enforceable legal commitments. This change reflected the global embrace of neoliberal principles, including market liberalization and deregulation. A shift towards comprehensive rule-based framework. The WTO extended its reach beyond trade in goods to encompass services and intellectual property, introducing agreements such as GATTs and TRIPS. This comprehensive framework aimed to harmonize global trade practices and ensure stability and predictability in international markets. The innovation of a two-tier dispute settlement system. One of the WTO's key innovation was its two-tier dispute settlement mechanism, featuring a binding adjudicatory process and an appellate function. This mechanism enhanced impartiality and rigor, positioning the WTO as a pioneer in international legal adjudication. The optimism surrounding rule-based trade. The WTO's legal framework inspired confidence in its ability to transcend political diplomacy. Scholars viewed it as a constitutional project that prioritized the rule of law, with countries ceding sovereignty to create a more stable and predictable trading system. Early successes and stabilizing global trade. During its early years, the WTO achieved significant milestones, including resolving trade disputes and facilitating market access through initiatives like the Information Technology Agreement. These successes reinforced its role as a stabilizing force in the global economy, a symbol of global cooperation and equity. More than a trade body, the WTO represented a commitment to cooperation and shared prosperity. Its principles of non discrimination, transparency, and enforceability empowered smaller and developing nations, ensuring a fairer global trade system and solidifying its initial appeal. The unraveling of the WTO. Here comes the rise of China and decline of WTO. The optimism surrounding the WTO began to dissipate with the rise of China as a global economic power. China's accession to the WTO in 2001, facilitated by the United States, was driven by the expectation that Beijing would adopt free market principles and dismantle its state led industrial policies. However, this transformation did not materialize. Instead, the US perceived that China exploited the WTO system to gain an unfair advantage, exacerbating trade imbalances and industrial policy conflicts. Then comes the shift in the US policy towards WTO. So, this disillusionment prompted a shift in the US policy, particularly during Donald Trump's presidency, where unilateral measures such as 25% tariff on Chinese goods were imposed in 2018, bypassing WTO rules. The appellate body, a key pillar of the WTO's dispute settlement body, became a casualty of this geopolitical struggle. Since 2019, the US has blocked up appointments to the appellate body, rendering it non operational and stalling dispute resolution. This obstruction reflects a bipartisan consensus in the US, with current President Joe Biden continuing the policy, signaling a broader disinterest in reviving the WTO's adjudicatory mechanisms. The shift from legalism to politics. So, the decline of the appellate body is not merely a technical issue but a symptom of a larger transformation in international trade governance. As legal scholar Geraldo Vidigal argues, the crisis represents a regime change rather than a temporary setback. The thick legal framework established in 1995 is being replaced by a thinning of legality as states reclaim sovereignty over trade policies. The GATT-IFICATION of WTO, reversal of WTO's founding principles. This regression, termed as GATT-IFICATION of the WTO, indicates a return to a less formal, diplomacy-driven mechanisms of the GATT era. The US seeks to dismantle the WTO's institutional controls to confront China without legal constraints. For instance, future US administrations, including a potential 2.0 presidency, are expected to pursue protectionist policies that may escalate trade wars. This shift underscores the resurgence of international politics over law in shaping trade relations. Now we will see the implication of the global trade. The WTO's weakening holds profound implication for the global trading system. Without a functioning dispute settlement system, the enforcement of trade rules become a matter of political leverage rather than legal adjudication. This undermines trust in multilateralism and incentivizes unilateral actions, increasing the risk of trade wars and economic fragmentation. Moreover, the erosion of the WTO's authority coincides with the rise of the regional trade agreements and bilateral deals, which often exclude weaker nations and exacerbate inequalities. The return to a GATT like system raises questions about the future of the global trade governance and whether the WTO can adapt to the changing geopolitical landscape. In conclusion, we can say that the WTO's inability to restore its dispute settlement system by 2024 reflects a broader existential crisis. While the paralysis of the appellate body is a pressing issue, the root cause lies in the shifting dynamics of the global power, particularly the US China rivalry. The transition from a rule based to a politically driven trade regime marks a reversal of the WTO's founding principles. Thanks for listening to this podcast.